Our title this morning is The Work of Giving, the Work of Receiving. And with this, we will begin our Saturday dawn prayer worship. The scripture reading we just read explains the rule of faith, which is that all things come from God and will eventually return to God. So all the things that we have, our lives, our families, our children, even our possessions, they all come from God. And they will all go back to God. This is our rule of faith. Based on this principle, we can say this is the summation of our lives of faith. And that is God's plan of redemption is the work of giving and the work of receiving. This can be seen in Israel's journey through the wilderness, and it illustrates the work of giving and receiving. Number 1, the work of giving took place right before the great exodus from Egypt. And we see this in Exodus 3:22. It says, "But every woman shall ask of her neighbor, and the woman who lives in her house, articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters. Thus you will plunder the Egyptians." So through this word, we know that when the Israelites made the Exodus, they brought out with them so much gold and jewelry and possessions, because this is the work of giving that God allowed during the time of the Exodus. Even today, God accomplishes his work of giving in our lives after we escape from this spiritual land of the fallen world. And sometimes God pours it out like dew, this giving. And sometimes he pours it out like showers of rain. Whether we feel it or not, this is what happens when we leave the spiritual land of Egypt. You will receive. Deuteronomy 33:28. So Israel dwells in security, the fountain of Jacob secluded in a land of grain and new wine. His heavens also drop down dew. So from heaven, God gives us this blessing like showers of rain and like dew. Although we may not live a life of luxury, we live in safety from the devastations in this world. It's not something that just comes naturally just because. And we have enough food to eat every day, all 3 meals. And we have shelter because of the grace of God who showers his blessing on us like the dew. And not only this, in Zechariah 10, verse 1, it says, "Ask rain from the Lord at the time of the spring rain, the Lord who makes the storm clouds, and he will give them showers of rain, vegetation in the field to each man." So you must believe this fact. Then you will be able to give thanks to God for his grace that he pours upon you. And you must believe that he pours upon this grace on you in various forms every day, like dew or like rain. So let us be thankful this morning. I bless this upon you in the name of the Lord. This is the work of giving that we all receive. And number 2, there is the work of receiving that took place immediately after idolatry. And we see this again through the wilderness journey. Why did God give the Israelites an abundance of jewels, silver, and gold when they went out into the desert, the wilderness? So in the wilderness, there was nothing. It was barren. But God gave them all these jewels and gold. It was given to them to be used as materials to build God's tabernacle in the wilderness. So God gave so that he could receive back through the tabernacle. Exodus 26:1. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twisted linen and blue and purple and scarlet material. You shall make them with cherubim, the work of a skillful workman. So these materials were given to them to construct the tabernacle. So in the wilderness, where is the materials to build something like this? There isn't. So God gave them these materials when they took them out of the Exodus to construct a church, a tabernacle for God in the desert. However, in the 11th campsite in the wilderness of Sinai, they made a golden calf out of the silver and gold treasures God had given them. They committed idolatry with the things that God gave them. This was a great sin. Exodus 32, verses 3 and 4. Then all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. So what God gave them for his own purpose, they used it to commit idolatry. And what happened after this? The Levites killed 3,000 idolaters through the zeal for God that they had for him. And then what did God say? This is found in Exodus 33, verse 3. God said, "Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst, because you are an obstinate people, and I might destroy you on the way." So what God gave them, they committed the sin by making a molten calf, an idol, and God was angered. So God declared that he would no longer go with the Israelites. But in Exodus 33:14, we see a sudden 180-degree change in God's attitude. In Exodus 33:14, it says, "And he said, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest." So suddenly God changed. He said he will go with them. So what occurred between verses Exodus 33:3 and Exodus 33:14? Why did God's heart change? First, when the people heard that God would not go with them, they removed the jewels from their bodies. So this is what happened. They took off the jewels that they had. Exodus 33:4. When the people heard this sad word, they went into mourning, and none of them put on his ornaments. So when God said he would not go with them, they grieved. And then they took off all the jewels that were on their bodies. And after this, God commanded them to remove their ornaments entirely. Exodus 33, verses 5 and 6. For the Lord had said to Moses, "Say to the sons of Israel, you are an obstinate people. Should I go up in your midst for one moment, I would destroy you. Now therefore, put off your ornaments from you, that I may know what I will do with you." So the sons of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. So at the time of the Exodus, they brought out all these ornaments, these silver, gold, and jewels. And now God told them to take it off their bodies entirely. These ornaments refer to the silver and gold treasures that God took from the Egyptians and gave to the Israelites at the time of their Exodus. And at this time, the Israelites voluntarily removed it from their bodies after they first committed that sin of idolatry. And God said they would not go with them. And then later, God removed it entirely from their bodies through his command to Moses. And then later, what were their ornaments used for? What did God do with these ornaments? This is found in Exodus 35, verses 21 through 22. And everyone whose heart stirred him and everyone whose spirit moved him came and brought the Lord's contribution for the work of the tent of meeting, which is the tabernacle, and for all its service and for the holy garments. Then all whose hearts moved them, both men and women, came and brought brooches and earrings and signet rings and bracelets, all articles of gold. So did every man who presented an offering of gold to the Lord. So when we hear this, after the ornaments were removed, it means they still kept their ornaments, right? Even after God told them to remove it entirely from their bodies. So although it was not hanging from their bodies, they kept it in their tents. But when it was time to build the house of God, the tabernacle, they voluntarily offered it up to God, and he used it to construct the tabernacle. This was the work of receiving, in which they gave back to God from whence they had been given. So we must know everything comes from God and everything goes back to God. This is the principle, our rule of faith. All things that God has given us, we as his children, we give it back. And this principle is found in Romans 11:36. And this happened also during the time of the wilderness. And after they gave their ornaments to God, we see that God again continued his walk with the Israelites. That is why God said he would go with them again. And today, the same is true for us. What is the motivator that causes God to pour out abundant blessings upon us? That is found in Romans 11:35. We must know when we give back to God what we have received, when the work of receiving takes place by God, then his blessings pour out upon us after this. So what we give back to God returns back to us as his blessings, just like it happened in the wilderness. And that is why Romans 11:35 says this. So Romans 11:35, we must know this. Or who has first given to him, that it might be paid back to him again. So everything we are given to God, we give back to God, and then God blesses us even more for this. So dear beloved believers, the possessions we have, our homes, our children, our families, our jobs, our health, our lives, they all come from God. They do not belong to us. So then we must return it to God. In the past, if you have used the things that God has given you to adorn yourself, may we now take it all off and lay them down at God's feet. And may He receive these things so that you will be blessed. I bless this upon you in the name of the Lord.